Hey guys, welcome back. Joe Brunsman, insurance broker to the stars. Today, a very nerdy but actually really interesting topic. We're looking at these dangers hidden inside of data centers that could really put us all at risk. So normally, the good doctor Eric Woodell here, this would probably cost like 20, 30 grand to get this type of advice. He used to do this for Vanguard. But he's bringing it to you guys for free because he thinks it's such a big problem. So we're going to talk about what that potential danger is, why SOC reports are not really all they're cut out to be, and then, of course, what can you as the little guy, so if you're an MSP, if you're a SaaS provider, if you're just a normal business that has to use these data centers, what are some concrete actions you can take to help mitigate this risk? All right. Now, before we begin, we are big timing over here. So we do have sponsors. First, CCA. You guys have heard me shout out CRD and Aston before, doing all types of risk management, IT contracts. So if you need that MSA, hit them up. They can help you out there. If you need dispute resolution, if you are 2 months into a 3-year contract, your client decides to dip and now you're on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars and all those licensing fees, you need help resolving that, hey, give CCA a call. You'll see their email address right there. And then next, Xclause, actually a very interesting new startup business. So you can sign up for their wait list, run by actually very good people. I've already spoken to them. This is going to be for those small or new MSPs that need contracts. And hey, I get it. When you start, every dollar counts. Maybe you can't afford someone like CCA to sit down and go line by line and handcraft, an organic free range contract for you. You just need something now. You need something to keep it all in the right place. That is what Xclause is going to do. So hit those guys up. I'll put a link to everybody's business down below, and hopefully that helps you guys out. With that, on to the video. Today, I am joined by the good doctor, Eric Woodell. Now, we're both former Navy guys, so we were just joking about that. But please, just 30,000 foot overview here. Tell me about your background, because I think that's important to this discussion moving forward.
Okay, well, sure. Yeah. Former Navy. I was a nuke electrician on fast attack submarines back in the late 80s to early 90s. And I did that for 6 years. Then I got out. I worked for 8 years in the robotics industry, Silicon Valley, saw the dot-com bust coming and cashed out, got out, and sort of fell into data centers by accident in around 1999. And from there, I started out as your basic technician working on crack units and UPSs and batteries and generators, that sort of stuff. And pretty much stayed with the industry up through now. And I was one of these guys, I was constantly trying to educate myself. So I was bootstrapping my way through school, got a bachelor's in managerial economics, then an MBA, and ultimately a doctor of science in information systems and communications. So I'm kind of an oddity, I guess you'd say. I'm an overeducated electrician. Um, so I have the practical knowledge running data centers and portfolios for the last 25 years, but also am able to bring in other stuff from the academic perspective as well. And that's what got me into things like audits and doing analyses, statistical analyses of what's happening in the industry and how it affects us with regards to the uh, for us for reliability, overlaying on top of that the risk profile that's building from the electric grid infrastructure instability and growing demand due to AI data centers.
Now, and don't sell yourself short, right? Like you were I believe it was like a mission critical analyst dealing with data centers. Is that correct?
Yes. Most recently, I worked for Vanguard Financial, right? And they treated me very well, so I'm not going to say anything negative about them. I ran their global portfolio for the last 6.5, almost 7 years, and we ended up running into some questionable things that were happening in the data center industry, and that so I ran the data centers. That was my day job, and then at night I was building audit programs for them and figuring out why we were having questionable things coming up in the co-location of space per se. In other words, they came to me and said, we don't trust the SOC 2 audits that are used to certify a facility as being properly maintained and that it's got proper cybersecurity. So we want you to build an audit program to to make sure that our interests are being covered. And that's what ultimately led me to where I'm at now. I mean, like I said, Vanguard treated me very well. We enjoyed a perfect operational record worldwide for over 6 years, which statistically speaking is impossible compared to the rest of the industry, but we pulled it off. But because of the audit program I built, and it also exposed a lot of, shall we say, shenanigans that are going on in the industry at large.
Now, and real quick, as a fellow author myself, I always like to put this out there to other people and how hard it is to write a book. You've literally written the book on this,
Yes, sir.
correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, and this goes back to my earlier days when I was data center manager, and like we we were having new managers from IT, different IT departments, and program development and so forth, and they'd get a gig working as the manager of a data center, and they were rotating in and then back out about every 6 months, and they'd come in and say, "What goes on here? What am I looking at?" They would literally be looking at a generator or a switchgear or a UPS or a chiller, and they'd say, "What is this? What does it do?" And after about the third time around of this, I said, I'm getting really tired of explaining the same stuff. So I started putting together a series of notes, and that kind of expanded and ended up becoming the only book on the subject of mission critical facilities management. And so that's my book. You can find it on Amazon, Mission Critical Facilities Management. And it's like a little black book. Basically, if an executive says, "Hey, we're going to be talking about UPSs, or we got to buy new ones. What do I look for?" So it's a little black book. You go to the chapter on UPSs, you read 15, 20 pages. Boom, you got all of the information you need, the pros, the cons for each approach, what you should be looking for, blah, blah, blah. And so you don't have to spend months in an engineering class or something like that. You read 10 or 15 pages, whatever it is, and you now have enough to make informed decisions. So that's how the book came about.
So suffice to say, you're not just a guy on the internet with a conspiracy theory. Like you have put in the time, you have read the reports, you have seen the shenanigans, as you say, the glaring deficiencies, the potential train wreck that could occur here. So ultimately, you're saying the problem, as we were discussing earlier, there's a reliability issue with data centers.
Yes,
Now, can you give me some examples of what you're seeing, and then we'll step off from there?
sure. Uh, Reliability, well, first off, we've got to split it off into two distinct pieces. Reliability is a function of two sides of the coin. One is the design. I liken it to an airplane. You build a very, very safe, modern, efficient airplane and so forth. The thing will fly for 20 years, only if it's properly maintained. If you don't properly maintain it, it's going to end up sooner or later being a hole in the ground, and it'll hit the news, all that stuff. So you have to have very, very good design, which the designs are actually pretty well standardized throughout the industry as far as what to expect, how we should build it, infrastructure, the overall architecture, and that's covered by things like Uptime Institute tier topologies. Again, very well covered, very widely known. There are lots and lots of engineering firms out there that can build you a very reliable facility. The catch is the reliability fails uh, overall because they're not actually being properly maintained. Um, Uptime Institute is the international organization, which is keeping the best pulse on the industry at large. And for example, a tier three data center is expected to have 99.982% uptime. Now, if you turn that around, you say, okay, what's the odds of it failing in a given year? It's 1 in 5,555, right? That's what tier three is. What's actually being delivered in the industry is 1 in 5.5. In other words, a tier three data center has an 18.2% possibility of failure on average, worldwide right now. So they're performing 1,000 times worse than what they were built to. The reason why is because they're not being properly maintained. That's what I discovered. And frankly, that's why I left Vanguard, because this is an element of risk that's out there that can be solved, but it endangers everybody. If you have any IT presence, online social media, online banking, medical records, anything that you do that uses a computer means you are at risk. This impacts every industry, and every large company is affected or at risk by it. Name it, you're affected.
Now, when you say maintenance, right? As former Navy guys, I have an idea of what that means, but what are some of these basic maintenance procedures that just aren't getting done that have a material impact on these data centers?
Well, for your general audience and so forth, the best way I could put it is that it's like doing oil changes in your car. All right, you do an oil change every 3,000 miles or 10,000 miles, whatever the manufacturer recommends, and then you go through and do your basic checks, make sure there's no oil shavings in the oil, there's no coolant leaking out, and you're doing things like that. This is what you do to keep a car running reliably for many years and hundreds of thousands of miles. All right. If you don't do that, eventually it's going to run out of oil, or you're going to end up with overheating issues, or basically you're going to get stuck on the side of the road. As we apply these maintenance practices to data centers, you have generators, which are diesel engines tied to electric generating apertures on the end. You have your electrical switchgear, like the same kind of electrical infrastructure you have in your house, like your breaker panel and your light bulbs and your stove and things like that. You have your air conditioning unit, like you have in your house, but they're just scaled up, much, much bigger for data centers to handle that much bigger heat load. And then you have backup power systems, which are called uninterruptible power supplies, or UPSs. And those have systems. They're basically systems to where when utility power fails, that it will switch over to a set of batteries and keep
Mhm.
everything alive until your backup generators can come online and replace the utility power. All right. So that way, as far as your computer systems, the IT systems that we all rely on, as far as they're concerned, nothing happened. It's seamless transfer over to the batteries. And then once the generators come online, seamless transfer over to the generators, and you can run indefinitely on those generators. The key thing is the batteries. Just like the battery in your car, they have an expected life of 4 to 5 years, but eventually they go bad. And in UPS systems that you see in data centers, modern data centers use batteries to where if one single cell out of a series of 240 cells or 240 batteries, they're all tied together in a big long string. If one cell fails, it breaks the string. In other words, it's like the weakest link breaking the chain. And as soon as that link is broken, boom, down you go. And your IT equipment goes dark, right? So then you're spending uh, hours to days, weeks, sometimes trying to bring your computers back up. You have to, once the power is restored, you have to power them up. Then you have to load your basic software, and then the software above that, and the different layers of software. And finally, your client information, hopefully restore what was lost. And like I said, that can take a significant amount of time during which you're out of business, right? So what IT organizations and most companies do is they try and rely on companies. They either have their own data centers, which is extremely expensive, or they'll rent out space in a co-location data center, and where they promise that they're properly maintaining their facilities. And then they'll have backup sites. A data center somewhere else might be usually less than 100 kilometers away, but it could even be on the opposite side of the country, to where if your one data center fails, then IT systems will automatically transfer over to a different location. And the hope is that you will, again, have a seamless transition so the client never realizes it. In reality, there are always problems. Transition transactions are lost. For example, if you're in the financial industry and you're doing business transactions on the New York Stock Exchange and your data center goes dark in the middle of some big transactions, those can be lost, leading to massive financial repercussions from it. For people that are doing things like, well, for example, AI right now, right? You're going to be going to use a bunch of NVIDIA AI chips and so forth, and you're going to be spending, say, 6 months and $100 million to train a new AI model. Well, if your power goes down in the middle of that, you have to start all over from scratch. And who eats the bill for that $50 million that was just lost? That's when the lawsuits start flying. It all comes back to proper maintenance of the facilities. You get that long uptime, that 1 in 5, tiny odds of an outage, 1 in 5,555, if you properly maintain the facilities. So if you have two sites, you'll never have them both go down. It'll never happen. But we have them happen all the time because they're not maintaining them. And this is what I was discovering. Sorry.
Now, there's already been research that came out from Hindenburg, right? Fairly famous group. Can you talk about that
Yes,
and what they discovered for a major data center organization?
yes. Hindenburg Research is a group that they keep track of different companies, so they short stock, right? They find stock that's overvalued and they short it. And they did an expose on Equinix, which is the biggest co-location company in the world. And what they had determined was that back in 2014, I believe, they had become a real estate investment trust. And so they were bought up by some big conglomeration, whatever. And after they became a REIT, what ended up happening was they cut their maintenance budget in half as a function of revenues coming in. A certain amount of your money, it's like driving your car. All right. You drive 10,000 miles a year, you're going to have to allocate some amount of money to do the proper maintenance of that car. And that would include your tires, your oil change, and air filter, gasoline in the car. Yeah, all of those things come into play. Well, if you suddenly cut your maintenance budget in half, you may not even have enough money to fill your gas tank for 10,000 miles, right?
Sure.
Much less do the oil changes or swap out the tires. So there is a built-in maintenance cost associated with operating a car or a data center. When you cut that in half, then something's going to be lost. So they cut their budget in half, and apparently that maintenance money was diverted to other projects that artificially pumped up their market cap in their market value from 80 billion dollars, as I recall, to 83 billion. So they pumped it up by an additional $3 billion. And then the executives of this real estate investment trust cashed out bonuses for pumping up stock value. Of course, the maintenance was not being done, so reliability started to suffer. And there've been several cases that I've heard about that I can't speak at length, but they halved their maintenance budget in half again. I think it's 2020, something like that. Anyway, so in 2023 March, 2024 March, um, Hindenburg Research picked up on this and said, "Wait a minute! They diverted all their maintenance funds over to other stuff that would pump themselves up to look better than they are for the cash bonuses for the managers and so forth. What about the clients? They're put at risk. They think that the equipment is being properly maintained, that their safety net is still intact, and the rest of it. And obviously, it's not. They were. I would request anybody that wants to look at this do a Google search, Hindenburg Research and Equinix, and the expose is quite lengthy and frankly quite shocking. Uh, Equinix is one of the companies I had detected as far as having shenanigans in the industry, and why I left Vanguard because I was seeing it from doing my reports on the ground. Um, I mean, does that answer the question, or we want to go further? Or
Yeah, like what? Well, first thing that popped into my mind was I think it's Mark Wahlberg who was in that Deepwater Horizon movie, right? And they call him in, and he's talking about how the maintenance budget has just been slashed and how, this isn't working and that isn't working and this needs updating and that needs maintenance and this has to be fixed, et cetera, et cetera, right before chaos inevitably ensues. So I think you were talking earlier about there's just basic maintenance that allegedly they're not doing.
Yes,
Like,
yes.
what are these basic types of maintenance that we as consumers, as individuals, would just think that they're doing? Like, are they not changing air filters? Are they not changing the uninterrupted power supplies? Like, what are they doing here?
I talked to one VP in the data center construction industry, and he actually was telling me at a trade show not long ago. He said the running joke is that once we finish building a new data center for a co-location company, after the commissioning is complete, in other words, verified everything works like it's supposed to, you hand the keys to the client and say, "Here you go, you're ready to roll." He said the running joke is that they will never do anything ever again, not even change an air filter. In fact, it is the running joke in the industry. They're not actually maintaining it. I've had data center managers from all of the big co-location companies come to me at trade shows and say, yes, it's happening here too. It's happening everywhere. They're all doing it. I can't say for certainty that that's the case because I haven't audited all of them. But everywhere that I've looked, with the exception of one company out of Australia, or their Next DC, that's the company name. They're the only company I've ever seen that was always Johnny on the spot. If there was a risk, they were on it before before I could even detect it. Right. So I'm not saying that they're all bad. These guys are very, very good. So if you're in Australia, there's somebody to look at. Now, that being said, as far as typical maintenance stuff, you have things like changing out the air filters. But the number one cause of data center outages is not because of the utility grid. We expect when we're building a data center that power interruptions are a normal part of business. It's normal for us. We build that into the equation. So we build it so that it will easily accommodate power grid interruptions as a normal thing. That's what it's all about. We assume that it's going to happen. That's why we have the battery backup systems, the generators, and all of that good stuff. But as I mentioned earlier, the safety net is those batteries themselves, and they have a finite life. And most data center failures are due to the batteries basically reaching the end of life, no longer being able to support the load. And then as soon as you have your next utility outage, batteries fail out, and basically the whole system folds in on itself. It goes dark before the generators ever have a chance to start up. And this has happened over and over and over. And I will give you an example. One data center company I looked at in Frankfurt, Germany, I was doing an audit. We had just gotten into a new caged facility, and I'm doing my first audit. The first thing I do, go straight to the battery reports. Show me what you got. And 4 out of the 10 UPS batteries that were supporting this little tiny cage, the report said right out on them, they said, these batteries are shot. They have to be replaced immediately. They will not carry load for you. All right. So I look at the computer maintenance management system record for the same exact job. The maintenance report from the vendor says very clearly, you got a problem. I look at the CMMS report, nothing. No defects, no comments, nothing. And the compliance manager is on the phone call with me. And so I asked him, I said, why are these defects that are recorded in your maintenance record not in the CMMS? He says, well, that's our company policy. He says, we never record defects. I said, wait a minute, why is that? He said, well, we'd always be late. In other words, we'd always look bad. So this company, they essentially run two sets of books. One, the real book, it's kind of like Al Capone, right? Way back when. They had the real books, then they had the ones that they showed the IRS. In this case, they're not showing them to the IRS, they're showing them to SOC 2 auditors, and they see it's clean bill of health, and they move right on, and they have no idea. And the only reason I found it is because I have the technical knowledge. My team, we've got the technical knowledge to go in and actually read the maintenance reports and say what's real and what isn't. That's how we found out.
So now we got a problem because so many companies, like I deal a lot with SaaS companies, managed service providers, MSPs, right? Various technology companies. they're almost wholly reliant upon these SOC reports, right, as their form of due diligence because there's ultimately liability down the line. You know, if you're a SaaS provider, you're using a data center, there has to be some element of due diligence there because if the data center goes down, you can't deliver your product, and now your client gets harmed because of that. Well, you're getting sued. And that's going to come out in discovery as kind of check one. How did you vet these guys? Right? We actually currently in the MSP space, there's an ongoing lawsuit that has to deal with, hey, this MSP who's the subject matter expert picked this specific backup provider when there were others that were out there that would have avoided this particular fault and issue, right? That led to the end client ultimately being damaged and losing at least $1 million, allegedly, according to the legal complaint. So if we can't trust these SOC reports, what is the average, you know, CISO, the average MSP owner, the average business owner that's using these facilities? What are they supposed to do?
Well, first off, it's an awareness issue. The for the average CISO, they operate on a philosophy of zero trust, right? You're constantly going through and verifying, making sure you got proper protocols, procedures, all of the pieces in place for your cybersecurity. That's part of zero trust. Now, they go to a co-location provider. Well, allegedly, SOC 2 says that they're certified not only for physical infrastructure, but cybersecurity. So why do you need a CISO? If they're SOC 2 certified, what's the point? Because CISO people know that the SOC 2 controls aren't adequate for cybersecurity, not even close. Then why are they assuming that they're close for the physical infrastructure, for the availability side? You understand? It's
Mm-hmm.
there's a disconnect here. So they think that okay, they CISO knows that the SOC 2 is not going to actually confer any value with regard to cybersecurity. Why would they think it's going to be any better for the availability side? And my point is, it's not the same. It will, SOC 2 auditor, the only qualification you have to be a SOC 2 auditor, whether it's for cybersecurity or availability, is you have to be a certified public accountant. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never met a certified public accountant that actually really knew anything real about cybersecurity. And I don't know that any exist anywhere with regard to availability, like understanding how a UPS works or how a battery works or a generator or anything else. They don't exist. You're looking for a unicorn out. So what do you do? The first thing is you understand that you have to apply zero trust philosophy to the availability side as well, which also falls under cybersecurity. That's the first aspect. The second is to put in a program to have a third party vendor, third party come in and verify that the maintenance, number one, that the architecture is sufficient to what you need. In other words, if you're looking for a twin engine plane, you want to make sure it has actually two engines on that plane, right?
Sure.
Then you're going to make sure that that airplane is being properly maintained and that the wings aren't going to fall off or the guy forgot to put an extra piston in an engine or something like that. These sorts of things. And then you have to look at their maintenance program ongoing. In other words, you have to keep doing touch points along the way to make sure that they're properly maintaining it. SOC 2, basically a CPA comes in and says, we do a quick snapshot, we do a high level, we might look at a few maintenance records, but obviously if they're getting bogus records, that's not going to mean anything. And they don't have the knowledge to look at the actual maintenance reports themselves. So they're doing a snapshot in time, and it may be up to 2 years later before they come around to do it again. SOC 2 using extension letters and so forth. What if you end up having a problem like I've seen, where 1 month after I did an audit, a generator literally completely failed. I mean, catastrophically failed, and it was no longer in the lineup. And it was out for almost a year. Geez, if you're doing a SOC 2 audit, they might not find it for 2 years, and you would never know that you were exposed. So you have to do this on a periodic basis. So the steps are, well, as far as I know, I'm the only one that offers this sort of zero trust program anywhere in the world. And it's
Hmm.
also backed up by Lloyd's of London. I'm insured by Lloyd's. So if they need insurance policies to go along with it, I'm the only one that can do it. And the reason why is because we're very effective. That's how we ended up with a perfect operational record of Vanguard while the industry, let's put it this way. If you, the industry overall, if if the airline industry suffered as badly and performed as badly as the data center industry, you'd be seeing 530 airline crashes per day. Per
Jesus.
day. It's absurd, right? And people quickly stop getting on airplanes. All right, so the industry is performing very badly because they're not maintaining it. The SOC 2 gives a veneer of legitimacy, and the program that I put into place for Vanguard and now offer is the only program that actually delivers the goods and is backed by Lloyd's of London. So I can deliver that. I have a team I can mobilize quickly. We can do that worldwide. It doesn't matter. In fact, we're offering to do that for the government. But going back to your question, what does a CISO do? Simple. You have to put into place a program that guarantees that you're actually getting what you're paying for. Very simple.
Now, stupid question here. Let's say I'm a. Oh, Eric, do I still have you? Ah, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's say I'm a business owner and my business is, 20, 30 million in revenue. And I just don't have the time to deal with this. Well, if one cookie is good, why not have two cookies just in case I get hungry and the first one gets moldy, right? Like, what's the problem with, like, all right, well, I'm just going to do basic risk management, risk transference principle of I'm going to spread that risk out amongst as many data centers as possible. I'll have one on the East Coast, I'll have one on the West Coast, I might have one down south. And then if, the US gets hit by an asteroid tomorrow, well, I got something down in, Sydney, Australia, something to that effect. Like, why can't I just go that path and then say, all right, well, the Swiss cheese model, right? What are the odds that one goes down? Well, it's looking worse and worse from what you're telling me, right? What are the odds that two go down, three, four? Surely we're not going to go through four data centers. Why not just spread that out as far and as wide as I can?
That is the actual approach that is being taken across the IT industry. And there's a problem with that. Number one, every time you put in a new site, you've got to pay for new equipment. To go in there, you've got to pay for the network connections. You got to pay for the protocols. You got to pay for the software and the personnel to manage that. And the problem is that you can go to such an extreme level with that the complexity paradox comes into play and becomes a major issue. And that is the organization spending so much money and becomes so big and unwieldy and so complex that it starts becoming unreliable in its own right simply because it's so complex. You can't manage it. And then, okay, well, if it becomes that big, you're going to hire more people. These are people that are not adding value to your bottom line. They're a cost element. They're not a revenue generator. They're just simply an insurance policy. And eventually, you reach a point where, in the worst case, you reach a point where these people are costing you more than you can bring in from revenue. Why? I mean, it really comes down to, like with co-location companies. All right, you had an outage in one site and you have your failover site. That saved you. Great. Great. But you get scared and you say, okay, I'm going to have more failover sites. Um, why did the first site fail? I'll tell you this much. You're looking at the Uptime Institute outage 2024 outage analysis report, which is the latest one. If you know what you're reading, it becomes very clear maintenance mismanagement is the number one cause of data center outages, and it's not even close. It isn't
Hmm.
even close. So, if you can get your people to actually, if you can get your co-location companies to maintain their facilities properly, well, it increases the cost for the co-location company, but it doesn't cost anything to you, and you completely bypass all the additional costs of these multiple redundant sites. And that's money that you can actually put towards, I don't know, revenue generation, making a profit, more money in the bottom line. In other words, you're basically forcing the colos to actually deliver on the goods that they promised. And it's no cost to you for any repairs that have to be made because guess what? They're on the hook for the SLAs. You are not for any mitigation of risk. So right now, yes, the easy way to look at it, intellectually lazy, I guess you would say, is to say, well, we'll just go ahead and get some more space in different diverse geographic regions. There may be some for geographic risk like earthquakes or hurricanes or what have you, but beyond that, there's nothing to be gained. So, like I was saying earlier, if you have two tier three data centers that are being properly maintained, you'll never see a complete data center outage because it's statistically impossible. Versus right now, where the chances are 18% in any given year. If you properly maintain it, if the system is designed to tier three standards and you properly maintain it, that sucker will basically run for the entire life of the building with never any unplanned outages. Why? Because it's designed that way and you're maintaining it properly. This goes back to like Boeing 747 jumbo jets. They were built, what, 30 years ago, and they're still flying because they
Yeah.
were excellent design and they're being given premier maintenance as well because it's being dictated by the FAA. You will do these maintenance steps. These maintenance people will be trained. You will do these audits, and the auditors will actually be technically qualified to know what they're looking at. They'll be able to look at a jet engine report. I don't know anything about jet engines, but they'd be able to look at a report on a jet engine and say, yes, this thing is operating properly, or whoa, you got a problem. Go back and check things out. Versus a CPA coming in and saying, I audited this airline. This airplane is safe. What? Would you bet your life on that?
No, no shot.
No, of course not. So the redundancy play is the obvious one at a superficial level. But as soon as you start scratching beneath the surface, it's not the right play to make. It's basically to go and make sure that your facilities are being maintained properly. And then guess what? You don't need all these redundant sites. You don't need all that extra overhead that's not actually delivering anything more. From an overall management, a strategic management perspective, the second choice is easily the winner.
So I would argue that if you're an MSP and you are providing backups, right? You have your preferred provider that gets passed on to your clients. That, are you as a $3 million grossing MSP, do you have the capability to like hire the good doctor here? Probably not. You probably don't have the money for that, right?
No, but there
Could
are some steps. There are some steps you can put into place. If you're not a big player, then it's going to be tough to sneak them in. But there are a couple of things you can do, like on your service agreement, a service level agreement, where you say things instead of the typical one, like from Equinix says, we will do periodic maintenance and we guarantee this uptime. Well, if you can go into the service level agreement and say, okay, you will do periodic maintenance in accordance with manufacturer recommendations or within industry accepted practices, if not best practices. And then we reserve the right to audit those maintenance records to make sure we're being maintained. If you introduce those two little clauses in there, that suddenly gives you teeth. It suddenly gives
yes.
you teeth as an IT client, whereas right now you have none. Very simple little thing to do.
So there's ultimately two ways to attack this problem, right? So we're talking right now about the bottom up approach, which is maybe, one company doesn't have the size or the teeth to, let's say, get that specific provision. But free market forces start operating, enough companies start demanding maintenance in accordance with manufacturers' recommendations, right? We could try to change the market that way. The other potential solution is the top down. And I know we talked about this a few months ago, but if you had any success from a congressional level, from a regulatory level, dealing with some type of oversight, like an FAA equivalent for data centers, because so much of our life is, bits at the end of the day. Any headway there?
I haven't heard of any, honestly. And I don't believe that we will until basically we get punched in the nose. And what I mean by that is, like I said, I obviously compare a lot to the aviation industry because it's the closest as far as performance expectations. Aviation industry has grown and regulations have uh, tightened up as a function of basically airplanes crashing and people dying. Right? They call them tombstone regulations. Up until now, the outages that have occurred, like the Azure one for Microsoft, other big ones, and so forth, they haven't put anybody at risk that I know of. But when government starts having issues, say like the Securities Exchange Commission, who they indicted a guy because he invented his own uptime council and his own audit company and basically certified himself, blessed himself. And so the Securities Exchange Commission indicted him for fraud because
Yeah.
his data centers, surprise, surprise, weren't reliable until we end up with some major boondoggle that occurs that involves the US government. I don't think we're going to see any meaningful legislation. These, going to your point as far as the bottom up approach with the contract or the top down with the government, yes, these are two approaches. One, obviously, the short term one with the contract change, the top level, top coming down, that's a long term trend that I'm sure will have to happen because our national infrastructure and becomes critical infrastructure at this point for the entire nation. But for IT clients out there, say your medium-sized MSP or large company that may be exposed to risk, there's a third approach, and that is, guess what? I mean, while I toot my own horn a little bit, we can go in and do an audit and find out where you stand. And at the end of the day, you may come back and say, hey, guess what? Clean bill of health, everybody's doing what they're supposed to be. Okay, shake hands and we're on our way. On the other hand, if they're exposed to risk, they will know what that risk is and have the leverage to go back to the co providers and say, you must fix this now. And trust me, I've been in on a lot of meetings where the colos were arm twisted into doing this and saying, well, we don't have the budget to replace the batteries. Well, of course not. You blew it on whatever projects in the
Executive
past.
bonuses. Yeah.
Executive bonuses, right? And
Company
I've
yacht.
been in
Yeah.
those meetings where they said, well, we don't have it in the budget. Sorry, that's not our problem. You will fix this. You are contractually required to fix this. Okay.
Yeah.
So it gives the IT clients the leverage to go back and have those risks mitigated to make sure they're getting what they pay for. And say on a data center, it may be, I know for most IT budgets, my fees are nominal. So for example, if it's a $200,000 a year contract that I'm doing and it saves you $20 million a year, where you don't have to go out and rent out a completely new data center and buy all the equipment and hire the staff and the rest of it, is it worth it? I would think so. You
Yeah.
know, this is the solution. And like I said, I've got backing by Lloyd's of London. I know that I'm the only one in the world that has that because we can deliver the goods. It's really that simple.
So, pardon me. Thank you, everybody, bearing with me as I am currently sick today, courtesy of my children. Um, yeah, I think generally I'm a pretty optimistic person. Uh, I'd like to think that everyone's acting ethically and looking out for the common man. This is one of those areas where I hate to be pessimistic, but I think you're right. It's going to take some massive problem, right? Or the problem just has to get so bad that either it's the bottom up, the top down, or some combination of the two to try and fix this issue at the end of the day. But with that, thank you to the good doctor for joining us today. Appreciate it. We'll
Thank you,
put
sir.
a link to all of your businesses, your books, etc., down below in the description. Eric, I'm going to go ahead and stop here, but Stay with me here for a second.
Yes, sir. Thanks.